The silence that surrounded the Nancy Guthrie case didn't slowly disappear, it detonated overnight. What investigators first believed was a meaningless 12-second audio glitch has now become the piece of evidence that shattered an entire operation built on deception, money, and influence. Savannah was sitting alone in complete darkness when her phone suddenly lit up at exactly 3:14 a.m. The incoming call immediately triggered alarms inside a federal monitoring system because, according to the official timeline, that communication was never supposed to happen. On the other end of the line was a voice so cold and emotionless that agents later described it as calculated beyond human reaction. Within seconds, forensic analysts isolated the voice pattern hidden beneath layers of encrypted distortion, and the impossible was confirmed. The caller was Tomaso, the mysterious figure investigators had spent months trying to locate. Known internally as the Invisible Man, Coyote had managed to avoid surveillance, erase digital traces, and stay completely outside public reach, but one late-night mistake exposed everything. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. The FBI immediately linked the signal to a secured property connected to Annie Guthrie, bringing an abrupt end to a 104-day investigation that authorities now believe uncovered one of the most carefully coordinated disappearances in recent years. Both suspects are now in federal custody, and leaked reports suggest the material recovered from their encrypted devices contains enough evidence to completely dismantle the narrative they spent months protecting. What was once dismissed as conspiracy theories whispered online has evolved into a documented timeline of deleted records, manipulated movements, hidden meetings, and coordinated obstruction. But even now, investigators remain focused on one disturbing question. What exactly did Tomaso say during the final 3 seconds of that phone call that caused federal tactical units to mobilize in less than 6 minutes? To understand why Annie Guthrie's arrest shocked the country, investigators say you first have to understand the role she played in public. For months she appeared on television presenting herself as the grieving face of the search for Nancy. She gave emotional interviews, pleaded for answers, and convinced millions of viewers that she wanted the truth as badly as everyone else. But behind the scenes, prosecutors now believe she was helping destroy it. Newly recovered surveillance footage from a private high-security gala revealed a silent 5-second interaction between Annie and Tomaso only days before Nancy vanished. No words were exchanged, yet investigators believe that brief moment exposed the relationship between them. Authorities now suspect Tomaso was not simply connected to the family. He was the operational architect behind the disappearance, the person responsible for coordinating movements, removing digital footprints, and constructing what investigators describe as a perfect informational void. Annie allegedly provided access, schedules, and internal knowledge while Tomaso handled logistics and concealment. Together, they believed they had buried Nancy's existence so deeply that no evidence could ever reconnect the timeline. But according to investigators, they underestimated one thing: Savannah's persistence. While the public accepted the carefully controlled narrative, Savannah continued tracing fragments others ignored, following broken leads and unexplained signals hidden inside deleted communication logs. Somewhere within that noise, federal analysts discovered a dormant frequency still connected to the network. By the time Tomaso placed the call, the FBI had already penetrated deeper into the operation than either suspect realized. What he believed was a protected communication line instantly became the evidence that destroyed the entire conspiracy. The moment he began speaking, advanced voice recognition systems locked onto a perfect match before he even completed his first sentence. And in that exact moment, the investigation stopped being a search for answers and became the collapse of an empire built on lies. For the first time since the investigation began, Tomaso no longer sounded untouchable. The man federal agents once described as emotionally unreachable suddenly broke composure during the now infamous 12-second phone call with Savannah. His voice was unstable, rushed, almost desperate. In the middle of the conversation, he referenced something investigators had never publicly disclosed: a red file. Then he mentioned Annie Guthrie by name and revealed that he had been following her direct instructions. But the moment that changed everything came seconds later, when Tomaso unknowingly exposed the exact GPS coordinates tied to Nancy Guthrie's suspected holding location. What investigators initially believed was a threatening phone call instantly transformed into a live confession captured in real time. Federal response teams moved immediately. The operation targeting Tomaso was swift, aggressive, and designed to prevent any possibility of escape. At the exact same moment, another tactical unit stormed Annie Guthrie's heavily guarded luxury estate nearly 60 miles away. According to internal reports, agents found Annie alone inside her private study, surrounded by partially burned documents and the smell of scorched paper still hanging in the air. In her hand was a leaking burner phone that investigators say had been active only moments earlier. Witnesses inside the operation claim the psychological collapse was immediate. Annie realized that Tomaso's single mistake had not only exposed him, it had permanently destroyed the carefully protected system they had spent months building. But what happened during her arrest may have changed the direction of the entire case. As agents secured the handcuffs around her wrists, Annie reportedly leaned toward the lead investigator and whispered a sentence that immediately triggered internal federal alerts. She did not blame Tomaso. She did not deny the conspiracy. Instead, she referenced a third figure, someone investigators had never publicly connected to the operation. That statement has now fueled growing suspicion that Annie and Tomaso may not have been the masterminds at all, but only the visible operators working under instructions from someone far more powerful. Within hours of the arrests, panic began spreading through elite social circles across Los Angeles. Investigators observed mass deletion activity across multiple private networks and social media accounts connected to high-profile individuals previously associated with Annie Guthrie. Public figures once photographed beside her at exclusive events suddenly began erasing years of digital history. The reason became clear after federal agents decrypted part of the encrypted device recovered from Tomaso. Hidden inside was what insiders are calling a shadow directory, a classified list of names allegedly connected to financial operations that stretch far beyond the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. The investigation is no longer being treated as a missing person case. Federal sources now describe it as a large-scale criminal conspiracy involving offshore transactions, information control, blacklisting operations, and coordinated digital manipulation. Savannah's phone call did not create the scandal. It exposed the machinery behind it. Adding even more pressure to the case, a former associate of Tomaso has now broken nearly 10 years of silence, claiming Nancy was never targeted out of personal hatred. According to the source, she possessed encryption keys connected to a massive offshore network capable of exposing powerful individuals tied to hidden financial operations. And while public attention remains focused on Annie and Tomaso, investigators are reportedly concentrating on something far more important: the money trail. One question in particular has created intense speculation inside federal circles. Who was Annie desperately attempting to contact during the final 3 minutes before agents entered her estate? And why was that individual's identity immediately sealed under federal classification? Some investigators believe the answer could expose figures operating far above Annie herself. At the same time, Annie's legal team has launched an aggressive campaign to discredit the investigation. Online platforms have been flooded with conflicting narratives targeting Savannah's credibility, while private attorneys continue attempting to suppress the FBI's voice analysis report. But according to forensic specialists close to the case, the evidence connecting Tomaso to the call is impossible to dispute. Meanwhile, pressure inside federal custody continues escalating. Internal reports suggest Tomaso Caione is now considering cooperating with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Sources claim he understands that if the contents of the red file are fully decrypted, the fallout will not simply destroy reputations. It could collapse entire networks of influence connected to Annie Guthrie's inner circle. Investigators describe the atmosphere inside interrogation rooms as psychologically unbearable. Annie has reportedly refused to answer major questions unless granted direct communication with the FBI director himself, leading many to wonder what information she possesses that is valuable enough to negotiate at that level. Some believe she knows the true location connected to Nancy Guthrie. Others suspect the secret is far larger than a disappearance and dangerous enough to threaten individuals protected by wealth and political influence. And then came the revelation that stunned even federal investigators. When agents finally accessed the encrypted red file secretly left behind for Savannah, they did not discover another statement from Tomaso or Annie. Instead, hidden inside the archive was a recorded video confession from Nancy Guthrie herself, filmed only 6 hours before the abduction began. According to sources familiar with the footage, Nancy appeared terrified, exhausted, and fully aware that she was being watched. But the most disturbing part was not her condition. It was what she said at the very end of the recording, moments before the camera cut to black. The deeper investigators went into the Nancy Guthrie case, the clearer it became that nothing about her disappearance was accidental. Hidden inside the encrypted red file recovered by federal agents was a video recorded by Nancy herself only hours before she vanished. But what stunned investigators was not simply the existence of the recording, it was the precision of what she revealed. Calm but visibly terrified, Nancy named the exact day Annie Guthrie and Tomaso would come for her. She described the method they planned to use, the timing, and even the way the operation would be disguised to the public. According to investigators familiar with the footage, Nancy understood long before anyone else that she was being hunted. Yet instead of running, she made a decision that has now transformed the entire narrative surrounding the case. Federal analysts now believe Nancy did not fall victim to a trap. She intentionally walked into it. The evidence suggests she realized the only way to expose the network surrounding Annie and Tomaso was to allow the operation to unfold while secretly leaving behind enough evidence for Savannah to uncover the truth later. What initially appeared to be a disappearance is now being viewed as a calculated sacrifice designed to destroy an entire machine operating behind wealth, influence, and secrecy. Investigators say the now infamous 12-second phone call to Savannah was not random panic from Tomaso, but the final domino in a chain of events Nancy had already anticipated months earlier. According to internal sources, the FBI no longer sees Annie Guthrie as the sole mastermind. Instead, agents believe Annie acted as the visible distraction while Tomaso managed the operational side of the conspiracy. But Nancy may have been the only person who understood how the story would ultimately end. Even more disturbing is what federal technicians discovered after analyzing the metadata hidden inside the red file. Buried beneath layers of encryption was a second set of coordinates leading to an underground location investigators have not yet reached. Authorities refuse to comment publicly on what may be hidden there, but insiders claim the site could contain evidence capable of exposing additional figures connected to the operation. The arrests of Annie and Tomaso may have ended one chapter of the investigation, but according to federal sources, the real war has only begun. As news of the arrests spread, panic erupted across elite circles connected to the Guthrie family. Digital traces began disappearing almost overnight. Private accounts were deleted, archived footage vanished, and several high-profile associates reportedly hired crisis management teams within hours of the FBI raids becoming public. Investigators believe many of these individuals feared the exposure of information hidden inside the encrypted devices seized from Tomaso's possession. One internal report describes the contents as catastrophic for anyone connected to the financial and political networks surrounding the case. Meanwhile, Savannah has become the central figure in what some are calling the largest federal exposure in years. It was her persistence, her refusal to abandon dead-end leads, that ultimately forced the conspiracy into the open. According to investigators, the moment Savannah answered Tomaso's call, federal systems already embedded inside the investigation immediately detected irregular signal activity. Within seconds, advanced voice mapping technology confirmed the identity of the caller. The so-called invisible man had finally made direct contact, and agents instantly moved to intercept. That single mistake changed everything. The call led federal teams directly to Annie Guthrie's fortified estate, ending a 140-day manhunt and triggering what insiders now describe as the arrest of the century. Agents recovered encrypted drives, partially destroyed documents, and communication logs allegedly connecting the duo to a far larger operation than anyone first imagined. The Nancy Guthrie conspiracy is no longer treated as rumor or online speculation. Federal authorities now consider it a documented criminal network supported by verified forensic evidence, time-stamped communications, and recovered surveillance archives. But despite the arrests, one question continues haunting investigators. What exactly did Tomaso say during the final seconds of that call that caused tactical teams to mobilize in under 6 minutes? Federal sources refuse to release the full transcript, fueling speculation that the final statement may contain information too sensitive to reveal publicly. Some believe it referenced the second underground location. Others suspect it exposed individuals far more powerful than Annie Guthrie herself. To understand why the case has exploded globally, investigators say it is necessary to look back at Annie's carefully constructed public image. Throughout the investigation, she positioned herself as the grieving face of the family, appearing in emotional interviews, pleading for Nancy's return, and presenting herself as a victim alongside the public. But while cameras focused on her tears, authorities now believe she was quietly helping erase every remaining trace of Nancy's existence. Recovered CCTV footage from a private gala held just days before the disappearance revealed a brief but chilling interaction between Annie and Tomaso. A silent 5-second exchange investigators now describe as operational coordination rather than casual conversation. According to federal analysts, Tomaso was never simply a family associate. He was the strategist behind the disappearance, a specialist in concealment, digital erasure, and controlled extraction. Annie allegedly supplied schedules, internal access, and personal information while Tomaso executed the logistical side of the operation. Together, they believed they had created the perfect void, a disappearance with no trail, no witnesses, and no recovery path. What they failed to understand was that Nancy had already prepared for the moment they came for her. And somewhere inside the encrypted red file, investigators believe the final piece of that plan is still waiting to be uncovered. Annie Guthrie's greatest mistake was never the cover-up itself. According to federal investigators, her fatal error was believing Savannah would eventually stop searching. While Annie and Tomaso celebrated what they thought was a perfectly controlled disappearance, hidden surveillance systems were already capturing fragments of communication buried deep inside their network. Investigators now believe the conspiracy had already begun cracking long before either suspect realized the FBI was quietly moving inside their operation. The question haunting agents today is whether Annie understood federal analysts were already tracking encrypted activity, or whether Tomaso unknowingly exposed the entire network the moment he made direct contact with Savannah. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the investigation changed forever. Savannah's phone illuminated the darkness of her apartment as an incoming call pierced through weeks of silence. To anyone else, it would have sounded like a brief, distorted conversation. But inside a federal monitoring center, alarms immediately activated. The first confirmed breach in the conspiracy had just been recorded in real time. Tomaso believed he was protected behind layers of offshore servers and ghost routing systems designed to erase his location and identity. He was wrong. Before he could even complete his opening sentence, forensic voice analysts achieved a perfect recognition match. After months of chasing a figure investigators referred to only as the Invisible Man, the FBI finally had direct confirmation. And for the first time in his career, Tomaso sounded afraid. According to internal reports, his voice carried none of the control investigators had heard in previous intercepted recordings. He spoke rapidly, referencing something called the red file. He mentioned Annie's instructions repeatedly, almost as if trying to shift responsibility away from himself. Then came the moment that stunned federal agents listening live to the call. Tomaso unknowingly revealed exact GPS coordinates connected to the location where Nancy Guthrie was allegedly being held. In that instant, the phone call stopped being evidence of intimidation and became a live confession. Federal tactical teams moved immediately. Witnesses described the arrest of Tomaso as overwhelming and absolute. Armed agents intercepted him before sunrise while a second operation unfolded nearly 60 miles away at Annie Guthrie's luxury estate. According to leaked details from the raid, agents forced entry into Annie's private study and discovered partially destroyed documents scattered around the room, the smell of burned paper still hanging in the air. In her hand was a disposable burner phone that investigators say had been active only moments earlier. The realization hit her instantly. Tomaso's 12-second mistake had not only exposed him, it had destroyed the entire operation. But investigators say the most chilling moment came after the arrest. As federal agents secured Annie in handcuffs, she reportedly leaned toward the lead investigator and quietly blamed someone else. Not Tomaso. Not Savannah. A third figure. That statement changed everything. If Annie and Tomaso were only carrying out instructions, then investigators began asking a terrifying question. Who was truly controlling the operation from the shadows? Almost immediately after the arrests became public, chaos spread through elite circles across Los Angeles. Investigators tracked mass deletions across private accounts, encrypted archives, and social media platforms. Public figures previously linked to Annie suddenly erased years of online history, while lawyers and crisis teams worked non-stop to contain the fallout. Federal sources later revealed the reason for the panic. The encrypted phone seized from Tomaso contained a hidden directory of names connected to a much larger network than anyone initially suspected. The Nancy Guthrie case was no longer being treated as a missing person investigation. It had evolved into a massive criminal conspiracy involving financial manipulation, offshore transactions, digital blacklisting, and coordinated information suppression. According to investigators, Savannah's phone call simply exposed the machinery already operating behind the scenes. Adding even more pressure to the case, a former associate of Tomaso has now come forward after nearly a decade of silence, claiming Nancy was targeted not because of personal conflict, but because she possessed encryption access tied to a powerful offshore financial structure. While the public remains focused on Annie and Tommaso, federal investigators are reportedly following the money trail toward individuals who may have never appeared publicly in connection to the case. One mystery in particular has intensified speculation inside federal circles. Who was Annie desperately attempting to contact during the final 3 minutes before agents entered her estate, and why was that identity immediately sealed under classification? Some investigators believe the answer could expose individuals operating at levels far beyond Annie Guthrie herself. Meanwhile, Annie's legal team has launched what insiders describe as a full-scale information war. Online platforms have been flooded with conflicting narratives designed to discredit Savannah and challenge the FBI's forensic evidence. Attorneys are aggressively attempting to suppress the voice trace analysis connected to Tomaso's call, but according to federal technicians, the evidence is irrefutable. At the same time, pressure inside federal custody continues escalating. Tomaso Caione is reportedly being held in a secured housing unit, and leaked reports suggest he may be preparing to cooperate with investigators in exchange for protection and a reduced sentence. Authorities believe he understands that if the contents of the encrypted red file are fully exposed, the fallout could destroy not only Annie Guthrie's reputation, but an entire network connected to her. Sources close to the investigation describe the atmosphere inside interrogation rooms as psychologically brutal. Annie has allegedly refused to answer critical questions unless granted direct access to the FBI director himself, fueling speculation that she possesses information too dangerous to disclose through ordinary channels. Some believe she knows where Nancy Guthrie was ultimately taken. Others believe the secret is even larger than the disappearance itself. And then investigators uncovered the revelation that transformed the case forever. Inside the encrypted red file secretly left behind for Savannah was a video recording. Not from Annie, not from Tomaso, but from Nancy Guthrie herself. The footage was reportedly filmed only 6 hours before the abduction began. In the video, Nancy calmly identifies the exact day, method, and timing Annie and Tomaso planned to use against her. According to investigators familiar with the footage, Nancy already knew they were coming. She did not accidentally walk into danger. She chose to. Federal analysts now believe Nancy intentionally allowed the operation to unfold because she understood it was the only way to expose the entire system surrounding the Guthrie network. What initially appeared to be a disappearance may actually have been a carefully calculated sacrifice designed to ensure Savannah would eventually uncover enough evidence to destroy the organization from within. The now infamous 12-second phone call was not the beginning of the collapse. It was the final piece of a plan Nancy had already set in motion months earlier. Investigators now believe Annie served as the distraction, Tomaso operated as the mechanism, but Nancy herself controlled the ending from the very beginning. Yet one final discovery continues to terrify federal agents. Metadata hidden deep inside the red file points toward a second underground location investigators have not reached yet. Authorities refuse to reveal what they believe may be waiting there. But internal sources warn that the contents could expose an even darker layer of the operation. The Guthrie cover-up is collapsing in public view. But according to investigators, the real war for the truth has only just begun. The pressure surrounding the Nancy Guthrie investigation is reaching a level federal insiders describe as uncontrollable. Sources close to the case claim powerful legal teams are already working behind the scenes to suppress newly leaked evidence connected to Annie Guthrie and Tomaso, while online narratives are being manipulated in real time to confuse the public and discredit key witnesses. But despite the chaos, one thing has become impossible to erase: the 12-second phone call that shattered an empire built on secrecy. Investigators say the collapse began in complete silence. At exactly 3:14 a.m., Savannah's phone illuminated a dark room as an incoming call broke through weeks of dead ends and false leads. According to official timelines, that call should never have existed. Yet within moments, federal systems monitoring encrypted traffic detected an anomaly connected directly to the investigation. What followed would completely transform the Nancy Guthrie case from a missing person mystery into a sprawling criminal conspiracy. On the other end of the call was a voice investigators immediately recognized as deeply disturbing: cold, controlled, and stripped of emotion. But the caller believed he was untouchable. Tomaso had spent months hiding behind offshore relay systems and ghost servers specifically designed to conceal his identity and location. What he didn't realize was that federal analysts had already embedded advanced surveillance protocols inside Savannah's communication network long before the call was made. Seconds after the line connected, forensic voice recognition produced a perfect identification match. The invisible man had finally exposed himself. Federal agents listening live to the transmission reportedly watched the situation escalate in real time as Tomaso's composure began collapsing. For the first time in his criminal career, the man known for precision and emotional control sounded nervous. According to leaked reports, he referenced something investigators had never publicly disclosed: a classified red file. He repeatedly mentioned Annie Guthrie's direct instructions and, in a moment agents now describe as catastrophic, unknowingly revealed the exact GPS coordinates connected to Nancy Guthrie's suspected location. That was the moment everything changed. What began as a threatening call instantly became a live recorded confession. Federal tactical units were mobilized within minutes. Witnesses described the arrest of Tomaso as swift, violent, and overwhelming. Simultaneously, another operation unfolded nearly 60 miles away as agents breached Annie Guthrie's heavily protected estate before sunrise. Inside her private study, investigators discovered partially burned documents scattered across the floor and the smell of scorched paper still lingering in the air. Annie herself was reportedly found clutching a damaged burner phone that remained warm in her hand. According to agents present during the arrest, the psychological collapse was immediate. Annie realized Tomaso's 12-second mistake had not only exposed him, it had destroyed the entire structure protecting them both. But the most chilling moment came seconds later. As steel handcuffs locked around her wrists, Annie allegedly whispered something to the lead federal agent that instantly altered the direction of the investigation. She did not blame Tomaso. She blamed someone else. A third presence. That statement has since triggered widespread speculation inside federal circles that Annie and Tomaso may not have been the true masterminds behind the operation, but only visible players working under instructions from a far more powerful figure hidden behind layers of money and influence. Almost immediately after the arrests became public, panic spread through elite circles across Los Angeles. Investigators tracked massive automated deletion activity across private servers, encrypted archives, and social media accounts linked to high-profile individuals previously associated with Annie Guthrie. Public figures who had once appeared openly beside her at exclusive events suddenly erased years of online history in what federal analysts believe was an attempt to distance themselves before additional names surfaced. The reason for the panic soon became clear. Hidden inside the encrypted device recovered from Tomaso was what insiders now call a shadow directory, a classified list allegedly containing names tied to offshore financial operations, blacklisting systems, and coordinated information control networks extending far beyond the Guthrie family itself. The case was no longer about one disappearance. It had evolved into a systemic exposure of a criminal underground operating beneath wealth, influence, and public image. Investigators now believe Savannah's phone call was simply the trigger that pulled back the curtain on an empire designed to silence, erase, and manipulate. Adding even more tension to the investigation, a former associate of Tomaso has reportedly broken nearly 10 years of silence, claiming Nancy Guthrie was not targeted out of personal hatred or revenge. According to the source, Nancy possessed encryption keys connected to a massive offshore financial structure capable of exposing powerful individuals hidden behind international transactions and shell networks. While the public remains focused on Annie and Tommaso, federal investigators are reportedly following the money trail towards something much larger. One mystery in particular continues to haunt the case. Who was Annie desperately attempting to contact during the final 3 minutes before agents entered her estate? And why was that individual's identity immediately classified? Sources close to the investigation suggest the answer may expose someone operating at a level far above both Annie and Tomaso. Meanwhile, Annie Guthrie's legal team has launched an aggressive counteroffensive designed to discredit both Savannah and the investigation itself. Online platforms have been flooded with conflicting narratives, manipulated leaks, and coordinated misinformation campaigns attempting to bury the FBI's forensic voice analysis report. But according to federal technicians involved in the case, the evidence is undeniable. The voice on the call belonged to Tomaso, and the moment he spoke, the entire conspiracy began collapsing in real time. The deeper federal investigators dig into the Nancy Guthrie case, the more dangerous the truth becomes. According to leaked internal reports, Annie Guthrie's legal team has launched a coordinated campaign to bury critical evidence before additional files become public. Online platforms are now flooded with manipulated narratives, anonymous accusations, and targeted misinformation designed to destroy Savannah's credibility and convince the public that the FBI's findings cannot be trusted. But despite the pressure, investigators insist the forensic evidence is impossible to erase. The voice analysis tied to the infamous 12-second phone call has already been verified beyond dispute, and according to sources close to the investigation, Tomaso may finally be preparing to betray the woman he once protected. Federal insiders claim Tomaso is currently being held inside a secured housing unit under constant surveillance while negotiations for a possible plea agreement quietly take place behind closed doors. If he cooperates, investigators believe the entire structure surrounding Annie Guthrie could collapse within days. Because this is no longer simply a legal battle, it has become a fight for survival. Annie reportedly understands that if the encrypted red file is fully decrypted, everything connected to her name, influence, and legacy could disappear overnight. The pressure inside federal interrogation rooms has reportedly reached a breaking point. Sources familiar with the case describe Annie as emotionally unstable, refusing to answer major questions unless granted a private meeting with the FBI director himself. That demand alone has triggered speculation across investigative circles. What information could she possibly possess that is valuable enough to negotiate at that level? Some believe she knows the final undisclosed location connected to Nancy Guthrie. Others suspect the truth is far larger than a disappearance and tied to individuals protected by money, politics, and international influence. Meanwhile, every moment Tomaso remains silent creates another opportunity for what investigators now call the shadow figure to disappear permanently. Federal analysts increasingly believe Annie and Tomaso were never operating alone. The theory gaining traction inside the investigation suggests the pair may have been executing instructions from someone hidden far above them. Someone whose identity remains sealed behind classified files and protected communications. Then came the discovery that changed everything. When federal technicians finally unlocked part of the encrypted red file secretly left behind for Savannah, they expected to uncover another message from Annie or Tomaso. Instead, investigators found a recorded video from Nancy Guthrie herself, filmed only 6 hours before the abduction began. According to sources familiar with the footage, Nancy appeared calm, aware, and fully conscious of what was about to happen. But the most shocking part was not her fear, it was her preparation. Inside the recording, Nancy reportedly identified the exact day, method, and timeline Annie and Tomaso planned to use against her. She knew they were coming long before anyone realized she was in danger. Federal investigators now believe Nancy did not accidentally fall into a trap. She intentionally stepped into it. According to analysts reviewing the timeline, Nancy understood that exposing the Guthrie operation from the outside was impossible. The only way to destroy the system was to allow the conspiracy to unfold while secretly leaving enough evidence behind for Savannah to uncover later. What initially appeared to be a tragic disappearance is now being viewed as a calculated sacrifice designed to dismantle an entire network built on manipulation, intimidation, and secrecy. The now infamous 12-second call to Savannah was not random panic from Tomaso Cioni. It was the final piece of a strategy Nancy had already set into motion months earlier. Federal authorities now believe Annie served as the distraction. Tomaso acted as the operational mechanism, but Nancy herself controlled the ending from the very beginning. Yet even after the arrests, one final discovery continues to terrify investigators. Metadata hidden deep inside the red file points toward a second underground location the FBI has not reached yet. Officials refuse to confirm what may be hidden there, but insiders warn the site could contain evidence capable of exposing people far more powerful than Annie Guthrie herself. As the investigation spirals outward, panic continues spreading through elite circles connected to the case. Automated deletion activity across private servers and encrypted archives has intensified, while several former associates linked to Annie have reportedly hired crisis management firms and private legal teams in an attempt to distance themselves before more names surface publicly. The collapse is no longer isolated. It is spreading, and at the center of everything remains the phone call that should never have happened. At exactly 3:14 a.m., Savannah answered a call federal agents were already monitoring in real time. On the other end was Tomaso Cioni, the so-called invisible man who believed offshore routing systems and ghost servers made him untouchable. Seconds after he began speaking, FBI voice recognition systems locked onto a perfect forensic match. Then came the mistake that destroyed everything. Tomaso referenced the red file, Annie's direct instructions, and the exact GPS coordinates tied to Nancy Guthrie's location. Within minutes, tactical teams were mobilized. Tomaso was arrested in a violent pre-dawn operation, while federal agents simultaneously breached Annie Guthrie's luxury estate nearly 60 miles away. Inside her private office, agents discovered burned documents, encrypted devices, and a leaking burner phone still warm in her hand. According to witnesses inside the raid, Annie immediately realized the conspiracy had collapsed beyond repair. But even then, she didn't blame Tomaso. She blamed someone else. A third presence. That single statement may ultimately become the most important clue in the entire investigation. Because if Annie and Tomaso were only the visible faces of the operation, investigators are now asking one terrifying question. Who was truly controlling the machine from behind the curtain? And more importantly, are they already preparing to disappear before the FBI reaches them next?